Hi, welcome back to Torah View and this special post-Pesach edition. This Shabbat, we read the Torah portion of Shemini. It's the story of the completion of the temple of the sanctuary and its inauguration. 6 months in the waiting. The temple was actually completed in the month of Kislev, which is roughly December. God said, let's push off the inauguration of the temple until Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the 1st of Nisan, because it's an auspicious time and it's an auspicious month. So this was a moment that was very much anticipated by the Jewish people, not the least of which was that the inauguration of the temple, the dedication of the temple, was set to be the indicator that the people had been fully forgiven, exonerated, cleansed for the sin of the golden calf, a collective sin that had put a tremendous stain and strain on the relationship between God and the Jewish people. And so with bated breath, the people waited for this moment when, after 7 days of training, on the 8th day, an offering would be brought. And the big question on everybody's mind was, would a fire descend from heaven, indicating that God had now allowed for His Shekhinah, His divine presence, to make its home and its residence in the temple. The moment came, and the fire descended from heaven, and the people were ecstatic. But on this most exciting and ecstatic day, sadly, tragedy struck as the 2 sons of Aaron, who were part of the priesthood, brought an offering on that day that the Torah says, quote, they were not commanded to do. And they were struck by a heavenly flame that consumed their insides and left them perished on the temple floor. Now these 2 young men, Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, were no ordinary men. In fact, the Torah says that just prior to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, God summoned Moses to come onto the mountain together with his brother and Nadav and Avihu, Moshe's nephews, Aaron's 2 sons. So special were they that they were considered to be the progeny of Moshe in terms of their being so close to their uncle, but not only in the familial sense, but as students of his wisdom and of the Torah, that of all the people they were selected to ascend Mount Sinai for the final preparation for the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Indeed, when they perished, Moses turned to Aaron and said, I knew that some life was going to have to pay the price of itself in the inauguration of the temple, so that people would forever know the reverence, the respect, the intensity of the holiness of this place and how it cannot ever be taken for granted. But I thought it would be either me or you. And now that it's been your 2 sons, I realize that their holiness surpasses the holiness of our own. But that doesn't really mitigate the tragedy of the moment. I recall a letter that's published in the Rebbe's talks that the Rebbe wrote to an individual who had expressed his utter pain at a tragic event that had occurred with him. This individual had commissioned a scribe to write a Torah scroll, and after a year, the celebration of the Torah dedication day had finally arrived. The Torah is brought to the home of the individual who had commissioned the Torah to be written, and as always, it was a community event and people came to participate in the completion of the Torah and the writing of its last letters. while there in the home, as this celebration was unfolding and the excitement was building and the last letters were being written, a young woman, a member of the community, suddenly passed away. And everyone present was crestfallen. And the dedication ceremony was instantly terminated, was instantly ended. And what was supposed to be a day of tremendous joy and celebration turned into a day of tremendous sadness. And so this individual wrote to the Rebbe, asking how could this possibly have happened? And perhaps it's an indication that God did not want me to complete a Torah, and perhaps the completion of this Torah should be delayed indefinitely. But more importantly, how could such a tragedy strike at such a joyous and propitious time and to this young woman? And the Rebbe said this in response. This young woman was destined to pass away that day. However, what you need to realize is that what God actually did was an act of kindness, in so much as her soul left this world in an environment of joyous celebration of Torah. Her soul was lifted to the heavens by the collective energy of all of those there. She could have passed away all alone, but God orchestrated things that her soul should ascend to the heavenly realm with the powerful energy of the letters of the Torah and the joyous celebration of the community. And this is the greatest propulsion that her soul could have ever hoped for and wished for. And certainly the Torah should now be completed. Here too, this tragedy that occurred on that day of the inauguration of the temple, as we just said, Moses understood, was an indication of the tremendous holiness of the spirit of the two sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. But nonetheless, our sages extrapolate from this incident the following. The Torah says, right after their passing of the two sons of Aaron, that one is not allowed to enter the temple intoxicated. From here, our sages say that what led to their demise was that they were, in fact, intoxicated. They were drunk. They had imbibed themselves with wine and come into the temple drunk. As a result, they offered an offering that was not asked of them. In fact, they did not consult with the authority of the temple, Moses, treating the temple more as a place that they were in control of, rather than respecting the hierarchy of authority that God had put in place. Furthermore, we also know about them that they were actually single. They passed away having not been married. When we put all of this together, what emerges, the picture that emerges here is this. Nadav and Avihu, as evidenced by the fact that they were selected to ascend Mount Sinai just prior to the giving of the Torah, were men of extraordinary spiritual caliber. But they were what you might call spiritual free spirits, and more on the spirit side, less on the protocol side. And when this day arrived of the inauguration of the temple, they were so overwhelmed and they were so excited that the only way that they felt they could absorb the energy of the moment and the excitement and have the experience of what was transpiring was to drink and to get high. In fact, they became so ecstatic, they took an ecstasy version of their own that ended up being a one-way ticket to heaven, from which their bodies were not able to recover, neither contain. In the words of the great mystic, the Or HaChaim, they were overcome with love. They were so passionate. They were so enraptured. They were so in love with God alone. And the experience of the manifestation of God in the temple that they allow themselves to be completely immersed and indulge in the experience of the moment, rather than channel that love into the appropriate service and protocols that the sanctuary called for. Herein lies a really important lesson about moments in life of love or romance and passion and inspiration. While romance is an important ingredient of any relationship, romance must always be channeled into responsibility. Romance without responsibility is fleeting and does not make for a sustainable relationship. You might draw a parallel to this in some broad sort of way to the hippies movement of the 60s. All you need is love. Make love, not war. It was all about free love, but it was short on responsibility, on channeling that love into building families, homes, and communities. And so while it had its moment in the sun, eventually, by 1973, the hippie movement had all but disappeared. Because when there is all love, but that love is not channeled and packaged and directed into responsibility, it's not sustainable. And here is the consistency, really, of the two sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. That's why they were single and not married, because the responsibility of marriage, the responsibility of providing for a spouse, for children, was something that they didn't have the discipline, the bandwidth to be able to commit themselves to. So what this tells us is this: while most of us probably won't experience the type of spiritual rapture that the sons of Nadav and Avihu did, but in some small way, we all have moments when we are inspired, even times when we channel that inspiration into drinking of wine, like the Seder. By the end of the Seder, drinking 4 cups of wine, we're all in pretty good spirits. And in those circles in which we conclude the holiday of Pesach with the Feast of Mashiach, we drink another 4 cups of wine. We're feeling pretty good. We're feeling pretty excited about our connection to God. And we have this romantic version of, or feeling, of sort of being above the fray, of transcending of the travails of and challenges of life. But ultimately, what inspiration is all about is about channeling. We have to channel the sense of freedom and liberation, let's say, that we feel on Pesach, and package that into the way we comport and conduct ourselves each and every day. Because ultimately, a connection with God cannot only be a romantic one, it must be a responsible one. Thank you for joining. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Storm the World Project.